Interpreting. Welcome all. Anybody involved in interpreting, and not just the players, but also family members and friends can really add a lot to the game. And it is a very important thing of what we do, I feel. It gives us a chance to show who we are, I guess. And especially folks being dressed in period clothing gives the spectators a good chance to interact with people from the 1860s, which is the people that we're portraying. And I hope today to answer, maybe we can answer some questions about why we interpret, what's required to interpret, how we might interpret during the game, and also what kind of things we might talk about. So why do we interpret? I think the most important thing is it does allow us a chance to interact with the spectators, which makes the event what it is, and I think that's probably the most important thing. And it also allows us to answer questions that spectators might have, not just about the game we're playing, but maybe also about the period that we're portraying, the 1860s. And it also allows us to explain some of the rules and customs and just how we played the game in the 1860s. And also it gives us a chance to show some of the equipment and maybe explain the equipment and why it was used and how it was made and that kind of stuff. That's also very important. And a couple of the more important things, I think, is it does allow us to promote both the Historical Society and the Muffins Diamonds program as well. So I think that's very important. And also the fact that it does help us recruit new players, which is obviously very important for the existence of this club. So those are kind of my general ideas of why we interpret. I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to add to it, but it's definitely a very important part of what we do. So what we need to interpret, this is not a detailed list, but I think the most important part is that we be dressed in period clothing with our uniforms in place and our hats on and our ties on, and not walking around with carrying modern things such as water bottles and electronic devices and cell phones and that kind of stuff, unless we have some kind of something to put them in, like a haversack or a satchel or something like that would be okay. And it's kind of important, even more important, I think, when there's cameras and stuff around, because I think photographers a lot of times might be looking for a picture where an older 1860s guy doing something that's very modern or speaking very modern, that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of important also. And I think you also need to have some knowledge of the 1860s game, the way we play it, some of the rules and customs, and a little knowledge of the equipment that we use, the balls and the bats, and also the uniforms we wore, the ties and the belts, and why we wear them the way we do. A lot of this information, I think, is in the brochures, and there's also a lot of good reading to give us an insight of baseball back then. There's a book that I like called But Didn't We Have Fun by Peter Morris. We also have other good sources. We have a vintage baseball expert here, Jim Tootle, that's written some books that have a lot of information about the time that we're playing in. So I think there's a lot of resources out there for us, and it's good to read up a little bit, so we know what we're talking about. And I guess also it's nice to have some kind of knowledge of the Muffins and Diamonds program. I know there's probably not a whole lot out there. There is a little bit in the brochures, I believe, and on our website. It tells a little bit about us, but I think also sometime I'd like to work on maybe a little bit more detailed history, which I think we have some of that written down already. So, but that's also important, just to tell people what we are and what we do and how we do it. So, question?
Yeah, we're going to, as an advisory board, we're going to purchase 2 of Jim's books and for circulation. So once we get these, I'll let you know. And then at games, you can borrow one and turn it in the next game, and we'll hand it out to somebody else, but want to circulate them around.
You show them your book there?
He brought one with him so that you can see what it is anyhow, and you're welcome to buy them from him too. Just thought we are going to purchase 2 for our club.
It's you might get, yeah. It's got a lot of information in it, and just asking questions to some of the people that have been here. There's a lot of knowledge here, so it's not something that's hard to be found. So, you know, if you ever have any questions about baseball back in the day or certain aspects of how the game was played, there's a lot of experts in the crowd here. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Okay, just a few things about how we interpret during the games. I think probably the basic part is just walking around the crowd and just mingling with the crowd, and more importantly, just kind of listening to the crowd to give you chances of stuff to talk about and maybe things to emphasize when you're talking to the crowd. I think it's very important that you listen, because that kind of generates a lot of the questions that you do get asked. So I think that's important. It's a lot of times I will just ask questions of the spectators myself, which is a good way to start some conversation. And it's also nice to ask questions of the spectators sometimes, such as how the game today is different than the way we were playing it back then. So I think one of the other things also that we do that's important is to tell people of some of the things that we have coming up, like matches or special events like the State House thing, and kind of promote some of the upcoming events to get potential spectators out to some of these events, which is important. One of the other things that we do, and I like to do, is carry some props with you, like a baseball or a bat, so that you can show hands-on to the spectators, give them a chance to feel the ball and ask some questions and look at the bats, and maybe get a feel for that. So, and also one of the things I like to do when you're talking to the fans is point out some of the differences of the way we play today and the way we play versus the way the game is played today. There's a lot of different things that are good about the way we play versus the modern stuff. So I think sometimes that's a good thing to talk about also. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is just some of the things that I'd like to talk about, or things that you can talk about if you're worried about, what can I say, or what things might I bring up. I have a list in no particular order. One of the things is cheering for both teams. I think that's one thing that stands us out, and I think that's interesting to talk about. The fact that we cheer good plays, that the fans would have cheered good plays by both teams. The fact that we have a coin toss that determines who bats first and who bats last, and that there wasn't a home team necessarily. The fact that we play a full 9-inning game, where they would have played, regardless of the score, they would have played a full 9-inning game. I think that's important. The fact that the balls are allowed to be caught on the first bound for an out, and that there was no ungentlemanly behavior in regards to the dealing with the cranks. There was no cussing, no spitting, no swearing, that kind of thing. The fact that we don't use gloves is a pretty obvious thing, and the fact that they lead to manly catches, as Jim likes to call them, and I think that's a good thing to mention. Also, the fact that the game was played by gentlemen, and that we played it as a source of relaxation and exercise, and that it wasn't competitive like it is today as much. the sportsmanship aspect of it, the fact that the players often determined who was safe and who was out amongst themselves. They didn't need a third party to make those decisions for them. Also kind of leading to the fact that the umpires really weren't there to make those kind of decisions. They were just there basically to make the decisions that the players couldn't settle themselves. So that's something else to talk about. What determines a fair ball or a foul ball? The fact of where it hits the ground first. Foul ticks, as they're caught on the first bound by the catcher, is something that happens quite often, unfortunately too frequently for some of us. The fact that you have to get back to the base on a foul ball before the pitcher gets hold of the ball and throws it to the base. The fact that we have some father and son combos is something else to talk about. The fact that some of the information about the bats, such as the bats couldn't be thicker than 2.5 inches, but they could be any length. The fact that the balls often were handmade and that they were in very short supply in a lot of cases. We also don't normally call balls and strikes. That's a little different thing that we do. And the last couple things I had were the pitchers were not there to get the batters out, that they were there to throw the ball to where the batter could hit it, and the batter would often let the pitcher know where he wanted it. And that batted balls are still in play until they actually hit the ground. I know we've had many instances where balls have never hit the ground. We had a ball hit into a treehouse once that never hit the ground. The fact that those are still in play, I think, is kind of a fun thing to talk about. And it happens fairly often. And then my favorite question is why we wear our belts backwards. So, but there's a whole lot of things we can talk about. I think it's something that to me, it's enjoyable. It's not that hard, and I think it's very, like I said, it's very much a part of what we do, and I think everybody should get involved with it just a little bit, and just get a feel for it, because I think it definitely adds to my enjoyment of the game. So I think I hope to see some more of us out there doing that a little bit this year, and that's about all I had. Is there any questions or anybody?
Why do we wear our belts backwards?
That's a good question. You know what I tell everybody? I said that's the way we wore them. I mean, that's the way they wore them. It wasn't, you know.
It's got the name Muffins on it.
Yeah, but but they asked why we were in the backwards. I don't know.
Maybe Jim Toon will give us a little more historical perspective.
The first place that the club showed their name of their club was the initial or monogram on the shield, and the old photographs from the 1850s and 60s show the club name on the belt. So of course it's got to be buckled in the back to show the name on the front. So that's an authentic thing that carries over from the photographs of the time, so that's why we do it. That's
Right.
the way it was done then.
But it's kind of just the way they wore them too. I mean, it was like they didn't know any different. I mean, that's just the way they you know, everything was on the front. They didn't show anything on the back. So
Just to amplify what Thomas said, just speaking to the crowd is something that's entirely different. You know, if you go to a professional game, the players will never talk to anybody, and you'd be surprised just saying hello to somebody or nice day for the game or something like that goes over so well with them. You don't have to be an expert and know every detail about the game, but just to acknowledge they're there, thanks for coming to the match or something like that. I know one time, a colleague of mine from work brought his 3 elementary school-age boys to the game, and they had a great time, and several of the Muffins came over and talked to them, and asked them what team they were on, and that kind of thing. And the next day, they were going to a Clipper game, and the boys asked their dad, "Will players come over and talk to us?" And, well, probably not. So they enjoyed the Muffin game more than the Clippers game because people came over and said hello to them. And so don't underestimate how well that goes over with the crowd.
Plus the fact that a lot of time we allow the kids to bat after the game, and maybe some of the parents and some other people bat, and I think that's kind of a good thing too. It gets people involved and makes it.
Kids are a conduit to the times. First, you take a ball to a kid, you'd be surprised what kind of conversation that would generate, from the parents.
Yeah, I agree.
It opens the verbs.
Yeah.
Opens the words flowing between everybody. When you put a ball in the mix, you talk. It has a history. It has a history.
Question.
I just wanted to comment on all your gentlemen's comments that those are exactly the reasons that I'm here. I mean, I mentioned to a few of you that I played against this program in Grove City last summer, and I have this one and an 8-year-old, and your involvement with my children resonated with me, along with all the other children and spectators that were there. So everything that you're saying is noticed by people, and that is what makes others want to come and join your program. So you're all absolutely right, especially in my case.
Yeah.
Good.
That's very good insight. Yes.
I'm going to take that, and I had a couple more things to say before I introduce Kurt.
Just a couple.
Just a couple.
Hold them a couple more things. Thank you.
Good job. Thanks, Tom. Thought Tom was a good person to do that because he's always, anytime he has a couple of innings on the bench, you don't see him sitting on the bench. You see him circulating around the crowd talking to people. So I think that's good.